Hi, this is Sam, and I'm gonna. Hello, this is Sam. Today I'm going to talk about grid layout system, and I would like to show you our reference point, which is my Focus Photography Club website. We're gonna work on the footer, but we're gonna keep it simpler than this. We're gonna have this in a horizontal form and this to span the whole width. But before we go to the grid layout, I'm going to talk about the layout system or the column layout system. As you can see in the mobile view with the stripes, there is 4 column, and on desktop, there is a 12 column. This is what you call 4 column grid and 12 column grid. This setup is mostly used by the developers and designers in the industry, and this is very essential for designing responsive websites as it makes our coding cleaner, more efficient, and easier. Now let's head straight to development. I have already started with the HTML markup, as you can see, as well as the styling, except the responsiveness of it. As you can see here, it is not responsive at all, and it still has a lot of work to be done. So we're gonna put it here, and this is our markup. Right now, let's just set it up so that you can see both the visual and the coding. Now this is the HTML, and I added some classes for the kid element and some of those parts, which is makes it easier to style different parts of the HTML. I usually don't code it this way. I usually use first of type, end of type, but to make it easier, classes is the way to go. Now let's start from the mobile view. To make it easier, we use a web development tool, which is the right click inspect. Now we're gonna do the mobile view first. When designing a responsive layout, you have to start coding with the mobile first principle in mind. Yes, it makes it easier because as your screen goes wider, then you can code from the mobile view, which is a whole lot easier and a whole lot cleaner compared to designing on the desktop view first and going to the mobile view second. That is a very hard thing to do, and I applaud you if that's how you code. But I'm telling you right now, it's not as efficient as what we're gonna do now. Okay, let's head straight to designing our mobile view. Since our mobile view is very simple, it's just gonna stack up vertically. We basically don't need grid layout, but why not use grid layout to leverage the property called gap, which is the spacing between rows and columns? And in that way, you don't have to add margin bottom and deem it useless when you actually have to use display grid on the desktop view. And in fact, if you use display grid on the mobile view, then you don't have to declare it again on the desktop view. As well as when you add content to the mobile view that needs complicated layout, then your grid layout is already set up, so it one less of a hassle. And so we're just gonna do just that. As you can see here, the whole thing is covered in a class set named newsletter. So we're gonna add that newsletter, and as you can see here, I added dot in the beginning because that's how classes is. If you have it as an ID, then you start with a sharp symbol, newsletter. But anyway, let's head straight to the newsletter. And we're gonna set display grid to the newsletter by using display and grid. And if I hit save, as you can see here, you can see this one negative 2. This is the grid overlay saying that yes, our section newsletter is already set in a grid layout form. So what we're gonna do right now, since as I said before that the mobile view in the standard setup has 4 columns, we are gonna set repeat for 1FR. You can actually do it like this as well. Shift Alt A, 1FR, 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 1FR. But it's very taxing to do that. So the shortcut is repeat for 1FR. And if you're wondering what 1FR is, it basically is saying that, hey, take whatever available space there is or wherever leftover space there is. So this is basically it's saying that the newsletter has 4 columns and each column takes whatever leftover space available. And when I click save, look at this. The 2 children items, and if I did say children items, it means the direct head of the newsletter. As you can see here, newsletter has the div class.text and has the div class.action as its children elements. So the newsletter is the parent and this too is the children element. So when I say children, it is the direct child. As you can see here, both the .text container and the .action container only covers a width of the one column because that's how it acts by default. Now, we can make this span the whole width no matter how many column it is by using grid column. So .text, then we'll do grid column, and we can do span 4 since the total is column 4, or we can do actions, grid column, start from first column until and span it until the last column, which is grid column 1, -1 / -1. Always make sure that there's space in between because if you don't, it's still gonna work, but it's not as efficient looking or as cleaner looking as the one with the spacing. Now we can do a shortcut. We have the newsletter, and to target all the direct child element, we have to use the greater than symbol and asterisk for all. That means all child elements of the .newsletter form, and do grid column 1, -1. I personally like 1, -1 over span 4 because of how flexible it is. Because what if your mind changes and you want a column of 5 instead of 4, or a column of 2 instead of 4? So you have to always adjust this. Now with this grid column 1 / -1, it automatically spans the whole row no matter how many column it is. So I prefer using that. And if you do Control C, see, it didn't change anything. Now, the next thing that I'm gonna change is this email address because as you can see, as the width widens, the button also widens. And I don't like that. It's not very nice. But first, we're gonna see what container it is in. It's hard for me to look, so I'm just gonna click this, hover over it, and boom, it's the .input wrapper. And since we already have it here, we can just add a line. We're gonna use display grid as well. And if I Control S, as you can see here, the input spans the whole row as well as the button. Because if you don't specify how many columns the layout has, it automatically defaults to 1. And by default, all child elements covers the width of that one column, and that's why it looks like this. So to fix this, we can do grid template column 1FR so that the input will cover the available space or the available leftover space, and then we can have the button to just span the width of its content, no more, no less. So we can do that by using auto. Here it is. Okay, now it's looking good. But then another problem is that I don't like how our input and the become a member button doesn't have spacing on it. And that is where the gap comes into play. Since we already set up the whole thing as display grid, we can use the gap. The gap is a combination of row gap and column gap. Just don't follow. I'm gonna show you what row gap is then. Row gap is the spacing between rows, just as the shaded area is. While the column gap is the spacing between columns, as indicated by the shaded area. Now, since we're using 2rem in both rows and columns, we don't have to declare column gap and row gap separately. We can just use gap as is. There you go. And I think it looks nice, except that I don't like that we don't have spacing from the edge to the elements. Based on the basic UI UX design principles, we need to have a spacing just to make the elements breathe and to not be not to look busy for the users. So we're gonna add spacing through the use of padding. Now, since we're gonna do padding 2rem for all sides, we can just do a shorthand property of 2rem 2rem. This is the shorthand for 2rem 2rem. It's basically the same. So might as well let your hands rest and just do 2rem instead. There it is. Now our mobile view is done. We can head straight to the desktop view. Now, just to remind you, this is what our desktop view looks like. As you can see here, the left, which is the .text container, covers the 50%, and the actions container covers the other 50%. And 50% of a 12-column grid is 6. So we're just going to do that. Here, I set up the breakpoint at 768 pixels. You can set it up at any pixels that you want. 768 pixels refers to the screen width where the layout will change from mobile to desktop view. Okay, and since it is the desktop view, how many columns do we need? Yes, you're right. 12 columns. So we're gonna target that newsletter. And since we already set it up as display grid, we don't have to declare it again. We just have to change the grid template columns into 12. So repeat 12 1FR. And if I click save, nothing happened because we set up our children to automatically span the whole width no matter how many column it is. How flexible is that? Then we're gonna target each kid to span 50% of 12, which is 6. So that text grid column spans 6. Then that action grid column span 6. And there you have it. We managed to build a responsive layout just using grid. It's very easy. But what if you want to make your life more complicated and you want a complicated layout? For example, you want this whole thing to be under this thing or under the text container and you want it to be centered. Easy peasy. This is how you do it. You can or you have to set up how many rows you need it to be. Since we want this underneath here, it means that it no longer has one row. Because by default, grid layout has one row. So we're gonna change it from 1 to 2 rows. How? By using grid template rows. And since we only have 2, we can just do auto so that each container just takes whatever space they need based on their content. Here you go. Nothing really changes. And actually by default, the elements, no matter how many rows you declare, it will just cover the first row, as you can see here. So we're gonna take auto, and then we're gonna do action would be grid row, span, second row, and then span 1. There you go. But again, I like it to just be -1. It's basically the same thing, just more efficient and more flexible. And since you want that they become a member to be in the center, we can also do grid column would be 2, span 6. It's not centered yet, so 1, 2, 3, 4. It needs 4, so it starts at column 4. And voila! That's how grid layout is. Thank you for watching.